All right,
Hello.
that's good news.
It works. Does it work?
It works, yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your last message. I got your email just 10 minutes
Yeah.
ago. And your suggestions looks good. And maybe if we do not have any question, I would ask you first question you proposed. You showed distance. What other measures could be used?
Yeah.
Okay, so the about with respect to the how long we would wait for questions from the floor. Maybe I would suggest 30 seconds. Does make it sense?
Yeah. Well, I would ask my question first, the one about other measures,
Mm-hmm.
and then that gives people a chance. So first of all, you say to people, please ask your questions now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we take the question about other measures.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, you can say, and are there any more questions? And then we give that 30 seconds and we
Okay.
see if people have some questions. And then maybe later this week, we'll have a chat and a think about what we can do to make things more lively next year.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. And now we have 9, audiences.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can, gain 1 or 2 more
Yes.
audiences within 8 minutes.
That's good. So you can see my screen?
Yes.
That's good.
Okay. Okay, how's the weather there?
Very grey, very English.
You mean windy and cloudy? Or
England is not always windy, but it is cloudy and it rained overnight, so the ground is wet and the air is wet.
So in these days you have a fine weather, clear skies.
Sometimes, but I mean, so when I was in Cornwall, we had clear skies. But now back in Nottingham, very cloudy sky, and it's a very grey cloud.
I see. So how's your legs?
I can walk a little bit on my foot, but I can't walk properly yet.
So you went to a hospital?
Yeah, and they said it will get better with time, but I can't run on. Well, I can't walk on it very well, and I can't run on it until I can walk on it.
Yeah, please take care.
Yes.
So maybe you ran a lot, too many times and too long.
I think that was when I ran. So I did the 100-mile race, then a half marathon, then a marathon. In the marathon, I ran very hard because I set a new Chico Besto.
I see.
And I think, so that was 1 weekend, 2 weekends. So in a 5-week period, I did those 3 races. Which is quite a lot.
Yeah, you raised your bar too much, too high.
I think so. I need to just bring it down a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes to go. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
And how are things in Tokyo?
It's now it's getting cold and cold day by day.
Mm-hmm.
And the weather is not so bad. Sometimes cloudy, but sometimes clear.
Yeah.
And they say it's getting very cold in this weekend.
Right.
Yeah, they say
no more fishing?
Pardon me?
No more fishing in this weather?
I want to go, but it's a little bit too busy to go.
All right. Busy at work?
Yes.
Well, that's good. I suppose now everybody is rushing to finish projects before the end of the year.
Yes. Oh, another one is coming. Yeah. Okay. So we have 4 minutes to go. Are you ready to start?
Yes.
Okay. So why don't we mute mic for a while?
Okay, I will mute my mic. So I mute my mic using a button on the microphone, which is why you don't see the symbol.
All right.皆さん、こんにちは。トークアイの佐野です。トークアイ提供のニュー MR セミナーにようこそ。まず最初に、本セミナーの目的を3つお伝えいたします。1つ目は、仕事でマーケティングリサーチに携わる方々に、学びの機会を提供することです。技術進歩、社会変化が激しい環境では、我々は常に学び続ける必要があります。2つ目は、英語で学ぶ場を提供するということです。マーケティングリサーチのトレンドは、常に外国からやってきます。好むと好まざるとにかかわらず、英語に学ぶことに抵抗感をなくしていただきたいというふうに考えております。そのため、できるだけ平易な表現、わかりやすい題材をもとにした講義内容を心がけております。最後に、 今日のセミナーのテーマ、比較を活用してデータからストーリーを見つけ伝える方法は、ポインター氏が世界各国で行っているデータの中にストーリーを見つけるセミナーの第3回目となります。全2回のセミナーはトークアイのウェブサイトにアップロードされていますので、そちらをご覧ください。それではセミナーを開始したいと思います。So, over to you, Ray.
Thank you for the introduction and welcome everybody. My name is Ray Pointer and today we are going to be looking at how to use comparisons to find and communicate the story in the data. So first, the agenda. We're going to start by looking at some examples, and then we will look at the key learning points from those examples. Then we will look at some more examples, and then we will review all of the learning we have done today, and then we will take questions and answers. So I'm going to use as an example of how to talk about comparisons and information, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. We might want to know how tall are the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur. And of course, we can use the internet. And the internet tells us that the Petronas Towers are 452 meters tall. Wow, 452 meters. But do we really understand what 452 meters looks like? It's a number, and it's a very big number, but it doesn't mean that we really understand it. So on this chart, we can see the Petronas Towers at 452 meters, but we can also see other famous very tall buildings. These comparisons give us a sense of how big the Petronas Towers are. But there is one problem. When we're choosing a comparison, it should work for the audience. In Japan, how many people have seen these buildings? So that still doesn't work as a great comparison. Adding this Tokyo Skytree gives a comparator that helps a Japanese audience appreciate what 452 meters looks like. So this is a good example of where we use a comparison to help make a number, and this time the number is 452 meters, be more easily understood by the audience. We can see the pattern. We can also see, when we look at the other buildings, that for many of the tall buildings, there isn't so much difference. And of course, the reason for this is when they built the buildings, they wanted them to be the tallest building, so they added a little bit onto the previous record, which is why so many of them are similar until you start getting to the really big, the Shanghai Tower, the Tokyo Skytree, and the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Now here we have a more complicated use of comparisons to make the data more visible. This data is from Europe, and it shows avoidable deaths per 100,000 of population in 2012. An avoidable death is a death that could have been avoided if people had exercised, if they had drunk less alcohol, if they had stopped smoking, if they had followed their doctor's advice. So that's what we mean by avoidable deaths, deaths that did not have to happen. And there are two comparisons that have been organized on this page. The first comparison is to do with sorting. Sorting, every time we sort data by something interesting, we are doing a comparison. And when we look at this data sorted and this data color-coded, we can see the comparison between women and men. The men are in the yellow diamonds, the women are in the blue diamonds, and immediately the comparison tells us, hey, in every country, men are dying more than women of avoidable reasons. So women are doing better, men are doing worse. In a few countries, the gap is quite small, but in many countries, especially those countries on the left-hand side of the chart, the gap between men and women is quite large. Which takes us to the next comparison. The left-hand side of the page, what does it have in common? We can see that people there die much more than in the rest of the chart, and we can see that men do very badly in this area on the left. All of those countries are in Eastern Europe. All of those countries used to be part of the Soviet bloc. So by making comparisons, we see the patterns in the data, and then we look at what the data says for the meaning and the explanation of why that pattern seems to be happening. So this is some data from the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, and it looks at how many mobile phones there are per 100 people in each country. And we've got the data for several Asia-Pacific countries, and we've got the data for lots of years. But as we've discussed in a previous video, the decimal places make this data very hard to read. So let's make it easier to read and use comparisons. So what we have done here is that we've got rid of the decimal places, we've hidden them, and we've sorted the data by number of phones per 100,000 head of population in 2017. We can immediately see that Hong Kong has got many more phones compared with the rest of the table. And at the bottom of the table, Myanmar has got fewer phones than other people. So by doing the sorting, we can make comparisons and we can start to understand what is the most, what is the least. We are talking to Japan today, so we also look to see where is Japan compared to everybody else. And Japan is near the middle of the table. Now we can make that data more accessible by using indices. And again, we covered indices in an earlier video. And if you've got any doubts about how to use indices, go and look at the earlier video. And indexes allows us to compare the growth patterns in different countries. So when we want to do the comparison, we need to make everything on a similar basis, and creating an index saying 2010 is worth 100 allows us to do that. And again, I've sorted the data for 2017. So now we can see who has grown the fastest. And Myanmar has grown by thousands of percent. It started very, very low at only one phone per 100 people, and it's now at a much higher level. It's actually now nearly at 100 per 100. And if we go down that list, we can see at the bottom, Vietnam, Singapore have hardly changed over the last 7 years. So that is quite interesting. We can look at the growth patterns, we can make comparisons. If we look for Japan, middle of the table, we see that Japan has stayed at the middle of the table all the way through that process. We can also compare with a fixed case. Now, what do I mean by a fixed case? We might compare, say, Japan with the mean. We might compare Japan with Hong Kong. We might compare Japan with Myanmar to find out a more detailed picture of what is going on and what can we learn from the comparisons. So here is a graph that shows the data for Japan, and it shows the data for the mean. So this is the average of all the countries, the mean of all the countries, compared with Japan, and it is remarkably similar. Sometimes when we use a comparison, we are looking for a difference. Sometimes when we're using a comparison, we're looking for similarities. So this comparison shows Japan is very similar to the mean, and this has not changed over time. Now, this looks like quite a complicated calculation. Do not worry, there is an Excel spreadsheet which you can download from the Torquay website, and that will show you how to do this calculation. But what I am trying to do in very simple terms is measure how different each country is. What is the distance? So in this table, I am measuring the distance between Hong Kong and Japan. I'm not measuring the distance in miles, I'm measuring the distance in terms of how many phones there are per 100 people. And it tells me the difference over those 2010 to 2017 is 319. And we can calculate this for every country. If I calculate that distance for every country and I sort the distance, remember sorting is an important part of doing a comparison, we can see that the country that is most similar to Japan is Korea, followed by New Zealand, followed by Philippines and Australia. Those are the people at the top. So that is where, when we do the comparison, there is very small distance. If we go to the bottom of the table, the three countries that are the most distant or the most different from Japan are Singapore, Myanmar, Hong Kong, China. So we can see the similarities and the distances. We've said before that a chart shows less data, but it shows it more clearly. And here is a nice chart for this information that again shows very strongly how different Hong Kong and Myanmar are from Japan. We can see that they are much, much more different, and then everything else is more similar as it goes down the table. So we are going to compare those countries together so we get a really good understanding of what's happening with respect to Japan. We're not going to put every country on the chart because it would be too cluttered. So what we have put on the chart are the three countries that are most different from Japan. And we see that Hong Kong is at the top of the table, and this is different because it has many more phones, and it's always had many more phones. Myanmar is different because it used to have very few phones, and the number of phones has increased rapidly, and now it's getting similar to Japan. And Singapore actually is pretty similar to Japan. So the third most different country is relatively similar to Japan. So now we can use our comparison data, and the story is only two countries, Myanmar and Hong Kong, are really different, are honestly different from Japan. Everything else is relatively similar. So let's identify the key steps that we have looked at in doing those comparisons. Most values are meaningless on their own. A comparison provides a context for comprehension and for understanding. We need to choose comparisons that create light. Usually that means picking things that the audience is aware of. That is why I chose the sky tree. That is why I chose to compare things with Japan in the data set. We want to create comparisons from the data. So we're going to look at subgroups. So male versus female, like we did on that health data. We're going to sort the data, and we're going to look at differences, and we're going to look at similarities to understand what is happening. And then we're also going to use comparisons to help tell the story. So there were two charts in there where we were using comparisons to help tell the story. The first is Japan is similar to the mean of those countries. That is a key part of the story. And there are only two countries that are very different, and those countries are Hong Kong and Myanmar. So that is the core story. We can talk about details, but the story is that Japan is very similar to the average, and only two countries, China and Myanmar, are distinctly different. So let's go to another example. And this is from a study that NewMR ran recently, 275 responses. And we were looking at what is artificial intelligence in market research. And amongst the people who did the survey, 66% said chatbots in market research are an example of artificial intelligence. Is 66% a high number or a low number? We know it's 66%, but we want to find out whether that means it's a high number and chatbots are really strong as artificial intelligence, or is it not so high? So what we're looking at here from the data set is a comparison between chatbots and all the other things in the study. So 58% of people said that automated facial coding was an example of artificial intelligence. 53% said automated sentiment analysis was. So we can see that chatbots compared to other market research tools is the highest. 66% is a high score compared with other market research possibilities for artificial intelligence. That's given our first reference comparison. Here is another comparison. Now we're going to compare chatbots with everyday items to see whether or not it is a really good example of market research artificial intelligence compared to more general tools. And what we can see is that chatbots are comparable to Siri and Alexa. Siri and Alexa are the top items in terms of artificial intelligence across general things like robot vacuum cleaners, the facial recognition at the immigration, automatic number plate recognition. So Siri and Alexa are the top items, and 66% is almost the same. So chatbots are definitely artificial intelligence. We can also, when we look at these comparisons, see that 13% of people said nothing is an example of artificial intelligence. And that's quite a useful comparison too. So my final example is from the SMR Congress this year, where I presented data from the Global Prices Study. And this is data from a simple U&A study with a sample of 500 people online. No analysis, no presentation. So it's a very simple market research study. And what this data shows us is a time comparison and a comparison between the key markets and the global market. Now, the key markets, as you can see on the right-hand side of the chart, are America, UK, Japan, Germany, and France. And if we look at 2010, the key markets used to cost a lot more than the global average. And then as we go forward, that distance has got smaller and smaller. So we can take some learning from this and we can tell a story from this. Over time, prices are falling, and the difference between the key markets and the global average is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So then we can start to look into the commoditized market for market research and the implications. So let's summarize the key steps. Most values are meaningless on their own. It scored 75. How much do I like Disney movies? 35.7. Numbers like that don't mean anything on their own. We have to choose comparisons that create light. So they have to help us understand the number. They have to mean something to the audience. If I tell you that this new product weighs the same as 45 elephants, that actually isn't so meaningful to you because you don't really have in your mind and in your heart an understanding of how heavy an elephant is, never mind 45 of them. So we're trying to use comparisons that make sense, create light. We're going to create comparisons from the data. So we're going to calculate averages. We're going to use subgroups like men versus women. We're going to pick reference countries to compare with. And as well as using comparisons to find the story, we will use comparisons to help tell the story. And we need to use comparisons then that make sense to the audience so that we do good communication. Arigatou gozaimashita. I look forward to your questions.
Hi, thank you, Ray. Let's move on to Q&A time. And I would like to keep the audiences to think about how, if they have any questions. I have one question for you. You showed the distance as a kind of, criteria, but what other measures could be used in terms of marketing research?
Yes, I can answer that. Do you want to just repeat the question, maybe in Japanese?
Yes. 隔たりという、指標を、今回は、ご説明し取り上げて説明しましたけれども、他にどんな、速度って言いますかね、測るのと書いて速度と読みますけれども、測り方というのを、マーケティングリサーチの世界では使えますかということです。OK?
So, we used, on this example, the distance. Probably the most common alternative would be a similarity measure, and we would look at correlation, or we might square the correlation to get the R squared. Things that have a similar pattern have a high correlation. So that is another good measure. It's a very good idea when you're working with data to look at the correlations between your attributes, the correlations between the brands, correlations over time, to get an idea of what comparisons are going to be useful.
Okay, so I will summarize your answer in the text, in the format of text, and share that with the audiences later on. So now let's move on to let's hear from the audiences if they have any questions. 30秒ほど、お待ちいたしますので、もし何か、ご質問があれば、質問の方、タイプしていただければというふうに思います。よろしくお願いします。特に質問の方、上がってこなかったようなので、今日の、セミナーはここら辺で終わりにしたいと思います。Now, we don't have any questions from the floor, so I would like to finish today's seminar. Thank you for Rei-san.
どういたしまして。
This video will be shared on our website, Tokai website, very soon, and I will send you an invitation to audiences registered. 今日の、ビデオについては、後ほど、トークアイのウェブサイトの方で、の方にアップロードいたしますので、先ほどレイが、言及していました Excel のシートであるとか、そういった付属の書類、あるいは、質疑応答の書類何かについても、テキストの形で、ホームページの方にアップいたしますので、そちらから、ダウンロードしてください。どうも皆さんありがとうございました。Thank you again, Ray.
My pleasure.
Now, goodbye.
Goodbye for now.